Now that we've disassembled the gun, we're going to show how to put it back together. The first thing I want to show is putting the catches back together. I like using just a little bit of white grease on this lip to kind of just help stick it so it stays together when you're putting it together. So you just lay them inside loosely. There's 5 of them. And these are made in a unit. There's a batch number and a individual number, and they should all match. We keep them as a complete unit, so if one goes bad, you have to replace all 5 of them. And then just kind of raise it up a little bit that they're still inside. Put this on top and just push it down, and it'll kind of just pop in, and it's all together as a unit. Remember, we did remove the O-ring on the inside, which would be the seal that seals the top of the catch piston. Make sure that nothing's loose. The metal part is still tight. And then make sure that there's some oil or light grease on the inside where the seals go. Insert the catches, assembled catches, into the bottom of it, and just set it inside and turn it until you see the bolt holes line up. They should go all the way through. And insert your little screws. And then lightly, don't drive them all down at the same time, just loosely install them so they'll center up. For display only, we're not showing using torque wrenches, but we highly recommend going with the values in the owner's manual and torquing all the fasteners, especially the ones on the nose and up here, because there is a lot of shock and they can come loose. Now reinsert the O-ring on the inside, putting a little light oil on it. Make sure there's no nicks on that. So you have to get it started in the groove and then just work it around. And then check the U-cup seal on the catch piston to make sure there's no nicks or cuts in it. And the cup on the seal needs to be up away towards the top of the housing. If you have it turned over, it will not seal correctly. So you simply put it back on top, and you'll have to kind of work the seal down just a little bit till it'll pop in so you don't roll the seal. And then as you push it down, if you can see, the catches will go in, and that would be the cop position on the rod. And then this is the catch plate. This is called the catch cylinder. And you simply put it on the back on it and line up the notches. If you would happen to have that cup seal in upside down, it may not want to fire. It may bypass and the air would blow by it and not fire. And if it was blowing by, you would feel air coming out this little exhaust passage there. So this is a complete assembled unit, and it would be ready to put on top of the housing. And just make sure C-port, everything lines up with the little notches, and then put all the screws in on top. There's 9 M6 screws on the top side, because that is taking the full force of the rod when it returns. You want to make sure that these are all good and tight. Same way, just lightly put them in so they all line up before you put the torque to them. And then it's usually easier to torque these once it's on the housing, where normally you'll have this in a vise and you will have a different hanger on them. The hanger isn't on it for clarity. It's easier to torque these when they're on. But one thing you have to remember, when you put it together, if it is in the caught position, which it was when we put it together here, you need to blow air, a light gust of air on the inside of port C, this one. You'll hear it kind of click to make sure it's open to receive the piston once it's installed. Now if you look on the inside, which you can't see by the camera, the catch piston is down, it's released. So now you've got the catches reassembled, and this passage, it actually goes up here, and then you have an air hose to and from your auxiliary handle, which we'll show in a little bit. So now we're ready to reinstall the main valve body. You want to make sure all your seals are in place, and there's little square grooves for all these seals, so they should slide in there and stay. I like to use a little oil or grease, just a spot of grease if you use grease. If you use too much, it can be a problem, but the grease will kind of stick the O-rings or oil so they stay in place. Making sure that you haven't popped these out and lost them. This is what seals the air passages in the nose. So all the seals are in place and they look in good shape. You don't have any debris inside the valve body. It looks nice and clean. So you put it on top, and there's 2 M55 bolts that go in the top, and then make sure that doesn't fall over. And then these longer M5 bolts, they go in the bottom here. And those need to be tightened before you put on the handle mount. So now you're ready to put the handle mount back on. Like we explained later, this can come apart if you need to, but usually it'll last a long time before you have to take it apart. To check it, I would blow air through these 3 ports to make sure you feel air coming out the corresponding ports on the top. And if you don't, then you know you have some debris or something inside that's plugging it. And it does say nose side down, which it can only go the one way because of the bolt pattern. So there's your handle mount with your cushions installed. And when you go to put the main handle back on, make sure this little spring is in there. I like to put just a little bit of grease, as you can see on the spring, just to kind of hold it in so it doesn't want to fall out when you turn it over. So turn it over and line up your screws. So your main handle is reinstalled. Make sure your trigger works easily. Now we need to put the main valve back in. The main valve, make sure it works smoothly, that there isn't any debris in it, and make sure the spring is on the stem. Usually you might want to put a little oil or something in here to make sure the valve slides in easily. And it's something we want to point out. When you go to put these valves together, sometimes they're a little hard to get together. You just want to kind of give a twisting action to put them together. Never tap on them or force them, or you'll ruin the valve. And then this seal is the end of it. There's a passage that goes from the bottom up, and there's a groove in this cap. So ideally that it should be straight up and down. And it'll go in and push in a little bit and be just flush for the cap. Thank you. And then also you have to plug the exhaust passage. But it's very important when you're doing PM and you've had any troubles with cushions to make sure you take this off, that there isn't any cushion debris on the inside. Because if there is there, it'll just go up and plug your muffler. And then reinstall your muffler on the upper side here, the same size as the plate, which will only go in the one port. Tighten that with the wrench until it's tight. You also have to reinstall the catch exhaust valve. It's the same type of construction as these other two valves. The very same valve is in here. Simply slide it in and push it as far as it'll go and stick the stem down. And there's a little spring that goes in the end. Make sure it's reinserted. And then put on your two little screws. And then to reassemble the 21 nose, you may have to remove the O-rings and inspect them. Just take a little pick of whatever kind you have. Make sure it doesn't, damage the seals. There's 3 seals on the inside. Make sure they're clean and well lubricated. And I would recommend blowing air through these 2 ports to make sure you can feel it coming out on the inside. One will be a pressure port, and one will be a port that goes directly up to the catch. So when you depress your head contact, it is making the airflow from the pressure port to the catch, and when it's at rest, when it's not depressed, it exhausts any air that might be into the catch. So you will not have any air to the catch unless this is depressed. And also, when you pull the main handle, it's important to understand when the handle is at rest, it's not depressed, there is air pressure on the top of the main valve pushing on the same side as the spring to ensure that the valve is seated. So when you depress the main handle, That drains the valve pressure on the top of the valve next to the spring and arms the port going to the nose. So the nose has no air pressure in it until the main handle is depressed. So that's a safety feature. Before it can fire, you have to depress the main trigger to have any air pressure to activate the head contact. So reinsert the spring in the head contact and then put your cap on. You'll have to depress it a little bit to be able to hold it for the screws to go in. So if this was going to be put back in service as a USSS 21, we would reinsert the rod, making sure that the cushions or the dish is towards each other, and just simply put it back together and put the 4 bolts. You can only bolt it together, like we said previously, in one spot, so you don't have to worry about alignment because it will not bolt together any other way. And at that point, that would be a USSS 21. Something I want to point out too, these anti-vibration washers are meant to be in pairs. There is a coarse side on one side, serrations, and then fine on the other sides. The coarse sides need to go together and then to be assembled to be your anti-vibration, so they lock together and keep things from coming loose. We don't recommend using a lot of Loctite on the main nose bolts because it'll tend to build up inside and it could actually build up and not let you seat or back the helicoils out. Since you're off and on so often, we recommend just some light oil and let the anti-vibration washers work. So if we wanted to convert this stunner to a concussion, the USSS 22A, everything here is common to either model. The only difference is the rod assembly and the nose. The catch is exactly the same. There's no difference in the cylinder. The main body is the same on both of them. So we're going to show how you convert this to a 22A by inserting the other assembly. The rod assembly is completely different. It is a bigger diameter. The cushions are the same, but it also has a catch end, same to the other one. And it has a place here with 2 flats that you can put it in a vise to hold it. So you simply put the cushions on first. They must be inserted first, and slide it down. It has a mushroom end. The end of this is considerably bigger than the rod, so when you strike the animal with this, it imparts just a hammer blow concussion. It doesn't penetrate the skull. But to keep it from coming loose, you have to have some way of locking it on. This is a rubber element. It has a cutout for an aluminum plate to go on the top side, and there is some very small knobs that fit into corresponding grooves to keep this from turning. So when you put it together, stick your bolt through it, tighten it up some so it doesn't come off, and then insert this in so those knobs line up and push it push it down, and then simply screw it on. You'll need a spanner wrench such as this, or the special spanner wrench that is shown in the manual. So you simply screw this on, this being held in a vise, so you can put it as tight as what it'll go. It'll go solid against the end of the rod, and get it till it's solid, and then seat it. We don't have a torque established for that, but tight. And then simply, when you screw this screw in, that tightens against that rubber element and squeezes it out and acts as a anti-vibration locking mechanism. So every time you go to remove this, you need to unscrew the screw to loosen it, and then back off your spanner wrench. So to replace the cushions on this model, you must take the knob off before you can replace the cushions. So on this model, we do not have a head contact is fixed. It does not move, but you still have to plug and connect these two ports so it'll fire. So when you put it in, you have to make sure these two holes line up with these two O-rings. The same way as the other models, the bolt holes will only line up in the one position. So then you can put your nose bolts back in. Like I say, I prefer to put just a little bit of light oil on them. You don't have to every time, but do not use Loctite. Same way with these, I just seat them. And then when it is new especially, you may have to use a dead blow hammer to seat it. As you use it a little bit, take it in and off, on and off, it'll be easier, and you won't probably have to use a hammer. And then finish tightening them. But these absolutely should be torqued every time to make sure they're the proper tightness. And then the rod can come out this far. So the head contact it'll protrude approximately, you can see the difference here, about 5 or 6 millimeters without any cushion. It'll actually be a little more in practice because the cushions will contract. And then the head contact can go in any position. It doesn't have to go in any certain spot. It can bolt on any one. Since it's not, you have to use a ball driver to seat them, and then tighten them up with the Allen wrench when you're done. Must be one more. So this is all you have to do to convert it from a 21 to a 22A. It is just the rod change and the nose change. All the other internal parts are exactly the same. So now when you fire this is how far the end will protrude and hit the animal's head. This is the auxiliary handle that is mounted in various positions depending on which hanger kit that is used. It can be in multiple places. It also has a cushion element to it. It has a bottom plate and then 2 urethane cushions on each end of it that you can adjust how tight they are by how much squeeze you have on it. If you over tighten them, you won't have any cushion left because they'll be too tight and you won't feel any movement. But if they're too loose, you'll feel it wiggle. So it's just a personal preference on how tight you have these, and then you lock the M8 lock nuts. This is shown with a hex mounting bracket, but there's also the 3-piece bracket or whatever bracket they prefer. So it is just a simple in and out exhaust valve. So there's and this is called the valve body. There's 3 screws that hold it on, and the valve on it just slips inside. It's a poppet valve, just in and out and exhaust, and it just slips inside the bore. And then there's a plate that covers it to keep it from moving when it's assembled. And then the trigger assembly is held in by this plate on the end. What that allows you to do, you also can turn this 7 different locations depending on where you want the trigger. Depending on your situation, you might want that like this or any of the 7 positions, wherever it's the most comfortable for the operator. And then that locks on with this. You can remove that with the trigger in. It'll simply slip out. You can see the 7 lobes that match this. The trigger is held in by a 1/4 inch roll pin, and it looks like this. There's a little roller bearing that hits the end of the valve, so when it pivots, it's rolling on this bearing, so it works very smoothly. And that's held in by a little roll pin that to remove the bearing, you just remove the roll pin. And then on the inside in here, there's another little spring just to ensure that it always, the trigger will open properly and stay open. So this is what your assembled trigger would look like. That's inside the valve, the handle like this. We won't show taking that apart, but you just remove the roll pin and you can remove the trigger. But you do not have to remove that to take this part in and out. But like I say, you can adjust whatever angle you want it depending on the operator. And then to reassemble it, just like we showed before, put the valve in and out. And you may want to blow some air through your 2 tubing connections to make sure that there's no debris inside of it. And the valve, it'll be pretty apparent if there is debris inside it. There's no orientation on it. It can be turned however you want it. So put that in and line up your bolt holes. and insert it back on and reinsert your 3 bolts. And then that's reassembled, ready for use.